This is 7 years ago, 2016. No, it's, God, 9 years? It was 2018, this conference in Czech Republic, so 7 years ago. It's really prescient. What I'm saying in that talk is that we have to sit down and discuss the devil, whether we're Jewish or Muslim or Christian or all our faiths, put our stuff on the table, because at the moment we're accusing the other guy of being a devil worshipper. And what I say in the talk is that when you start accusing the other guy of being a devil worshipper, then no holds are barred. It becomes a religious war to the death because you're fighting Satan. And I listened with concern when Putin invaded Ukraine. He said, we're going in to fight the devil worshippers. Apparently he actually believes that Ukraine is full of Satanists and devil worshippers. Him and Lavrov were spouting this stuff. You know, I don't believe that. I mean, I have good Ukrainian friends, they're normal people. But that explains partly the ferocity of the Russian attack and why he won't back down. Because, yeah, we're fighting the devil. And of course, from the Ukrainian perspective, Putin actually is the devil. So they're not going to back down. The same in Gaza. And I talk about this in the lecture that I gave, and that was before all the tragedy of recent events, but there was already trouble brewing. Israel was bombing Syria. You know, maelstroms were going on. So I addressed the problem of Middle Eastern politics around the devil. And of course the Muslims regard Israel and Zionism as sort of devil worship. They've lost the plot, they've become over-violent, slaughtering Palestinians, and they've been doing it for years. So in their eyes, Israel and people like Netanyahu are diabolic, literally. And I would say if I was from Palestine in Gaza and I looked at what's going on, I'd probably agree with them. If I'm Jewish and I'm living in Tel Aviv and I'm being bombed all the time and I have to take shelter, I'm going to say, well, no, it's the Muslims who are the devil worshippers. They're bombing us. We're only defending ourselves. They did October the 7th. They've been attacking our kibbutzes for years. They won't let us live in peace. They say they're going to drive us to the sea. So they're the devil. So anyway, and the poor old Christians get it from both sides. I mean, you know, everyone thinks Christ was the devil himself. And there is actually a Rosicrucian saying in Latin, Christus verus Luciferus, meaning Christ is the true light bringer. That's another story. But the point of this talk, anyway, it became a book which I published, Comparative Diabology and Western Esotericism. And there's a picture of me on the back in Cordoba in Spain, where there was a wonderful dialogue between Jewish, Christian and Muslim thinkers. And you could have had in Cordoba in the 12th century a seminar about the devil in all those religions, and philosophers would have come and talked, and they were highly intelligent people. So in the book, I've gone into what each tradition saw the devil as. You know, the Knights Templars, the Jesuits, different branches of Christianity. And I used the periodic table, can I borrow that, as the kind of the master index for the book. So I went into each, not all, but most of the periodic tables boxes, and I saw what is the devil in this tradition. I mean, obviously in Freudianism, say, to choose psychology, there isn't a devil. There's just crazy people who kind of lost the plot. And that's something that interests me a lot, is the humanist approach to, it seems to me, as a philosopher, that we've got to grow out of this idea of a devil, the devil. It was Voltaire who said in the Enlightenment period in France that, no, we've got to grow out of that nonsense, because that's if you believe in a literal devil, you can torture people to death because you're doing it for, you know, whichever god you believe in, and you're saying they're the devil. All the witches, the pagans, were tortured and executed throughout Europe for 300 years because they were devil worshippers. And then we exported that in colonialism to primal peoples around in North America. That was the justification for the slaughters there. And it seems to me that as a mature world, we have to unthink all that. And we have to realise that the devil is a psychological problem. this diabolism that we project onto the other. And their culture is sort of, it's us, actually. And we're in this together. We need to have a mature conversation about all this. And enter Freud. I think he was trying to do that. And I once met a very brilliant Jewish sociologist called Ernst Gellner, who wrote a book about the devil from a sociological, intellectual history perspective. And he was a very great thinker who said this. And then Jung came along and said the same thing. So I'm reading also this book, Jung and the Story of Our Time, by Lawrence van der Post, who, it's interesting, I've discovered from this absolutely brilliant book, that Jung's mother, who wasn't really an intellectual, wasn't, hugely influential on his life, but one thing she did do when he was a boy is she gave him a copy of Goethe's Faust, which is all about the devil. And Jung loved it. That was his early, he fell in love with Faust and Goethe because of it. And I think Jung, more than any psychologist in the 20th century, tried to really go down into what this devil is. The shadow. It's the split off bit of consciousness. And can we reintegrate that suppressed shadow back into a collective mindset instead of projecting, onto the other? So anyway, I don't have complete answers for all this. Let's say it's a work in progress. And Lawrence van der Post was a good friend of Jung. I listened to something recently, I can't remember where, but somebody told me, or I met somebody who knew this, that during World War II he was captured in Japan and he was held in a prison camp under pretty inhumane circumstances. And he was told he was going to be shot the next dawn. And he went out, went through a whole soul searching overnight, didn't sleep, knew his death was coming. He went and stood in the firing squad. Japanese soldiers fired, but they fired blanks. One of the guys in the row went mad because he thought he was going to die. And Lawrence just, that was a game they're playing. And the Japanese did this several times during his imprisonment. They would randomly say, you're going to be shot at dawn. He'd be taken out, expecting to be killed. And each time it was blanks. And it was mental torture they were doing. And the first time, Lawrence was the night before, he'd been gazing at the full moon. And he sort of had a talk to God and said, look, okay, I'm going to be shot at dawn, but thank you for this life. It's been amazing. And even though if I'm going to die in a crazy way like this, it was worth it. Look at that beautiful full moon. I believe in life, even though it's full of horror and death and suffering. I know who it was who said that. It was an Anglican priest in Oregon who is a Jungian, who spoke at the wonderful seminar that I chaired a couple of weeks ago in honour of the Holy Grail studies with Kathleen Matthews and John Matthews and others. He was one of the speakers. So it's not a. It's. I think it would be good to have an intelligent, mature conversation about this and clear the table. And that leads me to Moeen Yassin and the Interfaith Eschatology Conference we're working on in December. Eschatology is sort of the end times. Now, some people think, some strict Christians, Muslims and Jews take the devil story literally and think we have to defeat everyone and win the last battle. Their view of eschatology is there's a final fight coming. We, the forces of light, are going to defeat the forces of evil. And the forces of evil are them. Now, the trouble with that narrative is that they are saying the same thing. So our narrative is we're going to defeat Trump, we're going to defeat Putin, we're going to defeat evil. The trouble is they have exactly the same narrative in reverse. They're attacking Western liberalism because that's the devil. Oh, they're all Freemasons, they're all devil worshippers, let's get them. So I think what I'm trying to say, and I'll be talking about this in December, is let's have a peace eschatology whereby we can reconcile these fractured ideologies that are all interconnected. And that was the point of doing the table. You know, I'd like to sit them all down so they have to learn the table and do an exam in it. And then we can have an intelligent conversation about comparative diabology. Meanwhile, the Samad flotilla is heading towards Gaza, which is a sort of epochal moment, archetypal moment. Let's hope that it's defended. Let's hope that it's not going to lead to a horror show. I just pray that, you know, they'll let them get through and do a symbolic delivery of aid. It's not going to upset anyone to allow them to offload some bandages and flour. And I think if Israel was intelligent as a country, and I used to believe it was, and I've been there several times, I have many wonderful Israeli friends, they just don't seem to be in power. It seems to me Netanyahu has seized power and is holding on to it with his fake wars and refusing to let common sense prevail. Anyway, I support the Samad flotilla. I hope they land and it's peaceful. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, we have a very alarming development going on in Denmark and Norway. We have apparently Russian drones now attacking.
In Sweden too.
Oh, and in Sweden they've started. Yeah, so what on earth is Putin doing? He obviously thinks the West are devilish, so he really wants a war. And he's now doing drone attacks against the Scandinavians, who normally are pretty non-violent. They don't go to war. I would recommend him to back off and just stop playing, silly war games, because if you stir that hornet's nest, it's gonna end in tears. They're all NATO countries, and I think doing drone attacks against NATO countries counts as an aggression. It's very foolish, and I would recommend him to back off and stop poking the bears. I don't know if you've got any updates. What's happening in Norway? He's going for bases and things.
In Norway, I saw he was. I can't say he was, because we don't really know the original. These drones, they were hovering above the mid-Norwegian Air Force station, Air Force base.
But can't you track them with radar when they go home? Can't you see where they've come from?
They're tiny little buggers.
And you can't get them on radar, so
Not for long.
sophisticated enough.
Not for long.
And can't you just shoot them out of the sky?
That you can. But then you've got to be ready for them, and which I would assume they are now, both in Denmark, Norway, and as well as in Sweden, over Karlskrona, which is a major naval base of.
In Sweden.
In Sweden, I don't know if you remember back in the 70s, there was a Russian or a Soviet submarine that went on ground there.
Ah.
A whiskey class.
Really?
Yeah, a whiskey class. It was high and dry for several days.
Ah. That's something else that I've noticed in the news. A Russian sub has gone down in the Mediterranean, a nuclear sub.
Has it gone down now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just read reports.
They had some leaks. Fuel leaks. Yeah.
And they issued maydays and all that. So
it seems to be the same sort of problem that the Kursk
right
experienced up north.
And the danger is it might leak radioactivity into the Mediterranean. And so my advice to all these guys is just stop with the drone stuff. Realise we've got a problem on the planet, and we need to follow the true Lord of history, not the devil, the split off bits of.
Work together, guys.
Work together on finding the truth about all this stuff. Put these types like Putin and Netanyahu in jail. Put them in court, and Trump. Let the counterintelligence people, find enough on them all to lock them away, and rally the real forces of light who are trying to make peace on this planet. And the true philosophers and true saints of the planet need to come out of the woodwork. And, enough is enough, because people are dying, and the global wealth is being spent on all this militarism instead of on development and education and ecological advancement and scientific advancement. This is, it's like the king of the wood fighting who's going to be the chief king in the wood that night. but they're supposed to be priests of Diana, these kings in Alicia, and you see, Diana's the great goddess in charge of history, and one doesn't prove one's value to Diana by killing other people. One should do it by making peace. I think we need a new theology. As a Druid, I can say confidently that the gods prefer peace, and that's the best way for us to prove our worth. So anyway, there's a little roundup of the events of this week, which has been quite interesting, I would say. Now, yes, let's move on and look at the periodic table. So who's going to choose which one? That's the big question. We ought to have a machine that comes out with a numbered
A
ball.
raffle machine.
A raffle
would
machine, yeah.
make a software to do that for us.
Yeah.
Have we had Christian Humanism 55?
No, I don't believe we have. That's an interesting choice. Yes, that's a good one. Okay, let's do that. And I was going to go for humanism in the Renaissance classical tradition, number 70. So those sort of go together, really. So let's start with Christian humanism. And let's talk about what humanism means and what it is, where the idea came from. It's number 55. So I think what happened and where the word first started being used in European history was thinkers who came out of the bubble of medieval theology and realised that sort of real devil fight that was going on in the medieval times, where you tortured, say the Catholics would attack the Cathars, and they didn't have the same view of the devil and God as they did, so there was a fight to the death and they tortured the Cathars. Humanism was a reaction against all that, and it was connected with the rise of science. Francis Bacon was a humanist. Erasmus is known as one of the great humanists. He was from the Netherlands and he taught at Cambridge University. And what had happened was they'd recovered the classical writings of Greece and Rome, Latin, and they realised that these ancient pagans were quite wise. So the humanists in Florence were all reading Cicero and Varro and the sages of antiquity. And to get a complete Plato edition was absolutely to die for, because those books were still handwritten at that time. The booksellers of Florence were getting them made, at great cost. And so the Medici family in Florence sponsored the recovery of ancient wisdom. And so it spread. So Sir Thomas More he was a Christian humanist in Britain. And also in France, Jean Baudin was another who was... their argument was that to be a proper Christian, you have to be learned. It's not just enough to say, I believe in Jesus and go to church. What do you mean you believe in Jesus? Who was he? When did he live? What are these texts about? How do we know they're true? So they started rereading them in Greek and Latin. In France, Margaret of Navarre was a great humanist. So was in Germany Melanchthon, who was the colleague of Luther. And out of that grew, the Enlightenment, really. And it was Coleridge, who was in love with Kant and German philosophy in Britain. He was an Anglican and a poet. He was a romantic, but he also respected intellectual scholarship, and he coined the word humanism. Before that, it was just humanist, was a description of a person, a type of thinker. He said, no, this is so important, let's call it humanism, meaning it's a school of thought that values humanity. Because surely the point of all these teachings is that we humans have rights, we have duties, we have value. If we all have souls, which they believed, and they're immortal, then how we treat each other is very important. We shouldn't go around firing drones at each other. We shouldn't go around slaughtering and doing genocides because that's contrary to humanity. So, Hegel was a later growth of that. In France, Saint-Simon, who was one of the founders of socialism, was also a humanist. And Marx himself was a humanist. He was a learned man. He spoke many languages. He'd studied literature from all cultures. He read Italian, French literature, German, obviously, English, and he wanted to understand society and life as a human being. His thesis was on two great Greek philosophers, Epicurus and Democritus, who were both humanists as well. And it was really a Greek thing that ancient philosophy gave, the pre-Socratics, that you could explain life without recourse to supernatural divine intervention. Yes, there are gods, but they want us to flourish as humans. We don't have to keep going back to them. Like when you leave home, you don't keep ringing your mother up every day. You ring her up once a month. It shows you've moved on. And so that was what the Greek position was. And I think that was a feature of humanism in the Christian tradition. And it's still alive, it still flourishes. There are great scholars around. We could call them Christian humanists. I think what they wouldn't be supportive of is kind of a very narrow-minded fundamentalist type of Christianity that sees itself in a kind of corral against everyone else. So the anti-humanists there are certain anti-humanist trends in Christianity which are only our tradition is true, only we can interpret the Gospels and Bible in our way and everyone else is wrong. All the pagans are devil worshippers, only we are the chosen ones. We have the right to torture, kill and silence everyone else that disagrees with us. That's been a trend in non-humanist circles in Christianity from very early on, sadly. And there's a struggle within the Christian faith as to which branch will win out. The literalists, because there are whole parts of the Bible you can read literally, which means you should stone all witches, you should kill all adulteresses, you should, all people that have different types of sexuality should all be burned alive, etc., etc. You can read them like that, like a horror show. And people have. Humanism doesn't. It's much more generous in its theology. Yes, and it believes in love and faith and truthfulness. There's a whole lineage of Christian intellectuals who've argued that intellectual integrity is most important. That reason has to be satisfied as well as faith. The anti-humanist thing is more, I believe and that's it. Because I believe, I'm going to do it, And that self-references, that's the verification. No, you have to prove it intellectually. And that's why I wrote that book on the logic of peace. It has to be, faith has to stand before the hall of reason as well. Humour's important as well. Humanists like Rabelais, people, they love their humour. If you can laugh at yourself, then, and don't take yourself too seriously, then you'd qualify. Christ apparently liked a good joke too, and there is a book actually I discovered called Jesus and Humour, which is a study by an extraordinary man called Trueblood. That's his surname. He was a Quaker theologian who wrote this book on humour in the Gospels, and he said Christ was always cracking jokes. And if you read carefully the puns and the kind of double entendres and his responses to some of the attacks on him by the fanatics, it was obvious he had a very good sense of humour. And that shows he was a kind of, humanist in his own way. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that there have been a couple of humour people in America just silenced. Somebody called Kimmel. I mean, humour is a real threat to totalitarianising people that take themselves too seriously. And it's always been thus. So, there we are. That's Christian humanism. Any questions or comments?
Kimmel is back, by the way.
Oh yeah, he's got his own team together, hasn't he?
No, they took him back after a week off the air. They had to take him back.
What?
Part of,
Ah,
I think Disney lost a lot of subscribers. They cancelled their subscription to Disney channels instead from just overnight.
well, I hope they had him back without any, like, you know, sign here and don't make jokes about Trump type content.
Apparently it's come back as before, but part of the network is still reluctant to air him, but
Well, we'll see what happens.
they're
But
being told off.
good, because I think we have the right to good humour
Yeah, when he came,
and to laugh with people, not at them.
apparently when he was back the first show after he got back on the air was just blew any record of viewers.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So look, there's hope for America yet. That's a good sign. Maybe that's the turning point. You know, there's some residual Christian humanism enough in American society to realise, you know, it's time to call, you know, halt to all the nonsense.
We can only hope.
We can hope. Yes, yes. Right now, well, I said I would do classical humanism. I'll just add a little detail to that, which is that not all humanists are Christians, of course, and the discovery of classical antiquity, the rediscovery of it, also impacted on other thinkers, particularly the rise of science, poets, historians. What I do as a historian came back in that time in the Renaissance, and they read their ancient historians, Thucydides, Herodotus. So people study these texts and realise there's a lot of wisdom in all this stuff. In the Jewish community too, there was a realisation that Judaism itself needs humanism, needs scholarship to really understand its own roots. Spinoza was a Jewish humanist who challenged the official line that the Bible is the revealed word of God and it was written down by Moses, and you're not allowed to question that or you're going to hell. Spinoza said, well, you know, sign me up, because there are parts of this Old Testament that don't stack up. They're irrational. It says one thing here and then it contradicts it here, and it says something totally different here. So we've got to use reason to study it. And he began the historical study of the Old Testament as a Jewish scholar. He was a humanist because he said, my right to reason and knowledge triumphs over your right to impose your faith on me as a package deal. And he became a very important intellectual in European history. I'd also include Comenius in that, a great Czech scholar, philosopher, Christian, who believed in education and was a humanist. Also we have Paracelsus, who was Swiss, a medical doctor, who said, let's base medicine on evidence, on empirical tests of what works. Let's not just read Aristotle, although we love Aristotle. Let's actually update it with empirical stuff. And we can include also Pomponazzi, who was a great Italian humanist scholar who wanted to bring back the wisdom of the ancients, and was accused of being a pagan. Well, fine, I'll take that as a compliment, thank you very much. The great artists Michelangelo and Raphael were humanists in that they loved the human form, they reproduced it in art, they thought beauty is not something to be ashamed of. They painted works of great beauty which are still there centuries later. Leonardo da Vinci, about whom we had a study day here a few years back, and is buried up at Amboise, not far from here. I mean, he was a great humanist, and yes, he was a Christian, but he wore it lightly because he wanted truth, he wanted beauty, proportion, divine symmetry. He was interested in the divine mathematics behind existence. He thought the body has secrets in its mathematical proportions that can be studied. And some years ago I went to a brilliant exhibition in Dublin at the Great Library in Dublin, and they had all Da Vinci's works there. Plus they'd reconstructed his library in Italy, and they'd borrowed the books from all other libraries, and a lot of them were Muslim books, Islamic scientific books about geometry, the eye. Muslim scientists at that time were doing incredible scientific stuff on mathematics. They invented algebra, for God's sake. And old Leonardo had all the books. People don't realise he was a real scholar of Islamic science, which he then applied to his scientific art. And so that's true Renaissance humanism, I think. And Descartes grew out of that, the great French philosopher who's from down the road here, on the way to the sea. If you go down La Creuse River, you hit the Loire, round about a village called Descartes. It's a town now, they renamed it after him. And he ended up in Sweden as the advisor to the Queen, Christina. He was a humanist, he wanted to find truth, and he used the method of doubt. Because you shouldn't be afraid of doubt. If you don't know something, you say, I don't know. Because that's the only way you can grow your knowledge. That was Descartes' method. And I subscribed to it as well. And also Leibniz was another great humanist from that same time. So, and then so was Vico in Italy. These people founded modern thought, and we should not sell ourselves short. All of them wanted peace. They all wanted us to reconcile each other above the tribalisms of humanity. And it's a project. And, in the Islamic world, there were great scholars and humanists working as Muslim scholars. I have books on them all, I've studied them all. And also, in the Jewish world, Maimonides, regarded as the greatest Jewish philosopher, was a humanist. He loved his Aristotle. He studied all these works, whether it was Islamic or Jewish or whatever. That's where we should come back together as a planet, I think, and recover that universalist humanism. That's what all these UN presidents are saying, apart from one or two exceptions, I won't name names, who say, no, my box is
But they got
no.
the right to veto, don't they?
Well, that's under review, let's say, because I think that's got to be reviewed. The right to veto shouldn't hold up humanity from our urge towards universal peace. That's going against what everything the UN stands for. Okay, that's enough of that one. But it's just, fascinating stuff, isn't it? Any questions?
No.
Let me just honour the memory of Johan Galtung, the great Norwegian scientist and scholar and humanist who I met and who inspired me to get into peace studies. And he was a humanist too. He had, I've got his autobiography here, one of his books in English. And, he had to fight his father, who was a very conservative Norwegian Christian type, who insisted that Johan, walk the straight and narrow path and join the army and, the whole thing. And Johan became a pacifist, he became a humanist, he rebelled, he ended up being interested in Buddhism, Oriental philosophy, married a Japanese woman, and sadly he died a couple of years ago. We had an online thing in honour of him, but he lived to his 90s, and he caused a lot of trouble with the military establishments and was a peace scholar. So I honour his memory as a great Norwegian humanist, really. Okay, let's finish with our Tarot of the Gods, I think. Let's see what we've got there, as we normally do. Right, shall I shuffle them up here? Right. Okay. Voila.